The morning Corvin Hale was fired, the CEO never looked up from her tablet. After 30 years of arriving before sunrise, staying after everyone else left, and quietly keeping the company alive through its hardest days, the single father was dismissed in less than 3 minutes. But before he walked out of that glass office for the final time, Corvin placed one small, worn object on the CEO's desk. She glanced at it with irritation, thinking it was another desperate attempt to change her mind. She had no idea that the object would force her to uncover a truth about her own company, and about the man she had just thrown away. If you believe kindness and second chances can change a person's life, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad. Because sometimes the people we overlook are the very people holding everything together. Corvin had worked for Halcyon Industries since he was 23 years old. Back then, the company occupied only 2 floors of a modest downtown building, and Corvin had joined as a junior maintenance technician with little more than a toolbox, a second-hand car, and a determination to build a stable life for his family. Over 3 decades, he had repaired broken machines, solved electrical problems during overnight emergencies, helped new employees learn the building, and quietly stepped into whatever role was needed. He never chased promotions or demanded recognition. His greatest achievement, in his eyes, was raising his daughter, Mireya, after her mother passed away when Mireya was only 6. Every morning, Corvin woke before dawn, prepared breakfast, packed his daughter's lunch, and drove to work while the city was still waking beneath the pale blue morning sky. He had missed birthdays and school performances because emergencies happened at work, but whenever he could, he made up for those moments with handwritten notes, homemade dinners, and long walks where Mireya told him about everything happening in her world. Now Corvin was 53, his dark hair touched with silver, his hands rough from years of practical work, and his old company identification badge hanging from a lanyard that had become almost as familiar as his own watch. The building around him had changed dramatically. The small company had become a corporate giant with polished marble floors, glass conference rooms, automated doors, and employees who often knew more about quarterly numbers than they knew about the people working beside them. Corvin had watched every transformation. He remembered when the current CEO, Seraphina Vale, was still a teenager visiting the office with her father, the company's founder. She had grown into a brilliant, disciplined businesswoman who believed efficiency was everything. When her father retired, Seraphina took control and began cutting anything she considered unnecessary. That morning, Corvin received an email ordering him to report to her office. He assumed it concerned the maintenance department because one of the cooling systems had been malfunctioning. Instead, when he entered the executive office, he saw a human resources director standing beside Seraphina's desk. The meaning became clear before anyone said a word. His position was being eliminated as part of a restructuring plan. His 30 years of service had been reduced to a line on a spreadsheet. Corvin listened quietly as Seraphina explained that the company was outsourcing facilities management and that experienced employees were simply too expensive. She spoke professionally, almost clinically, as though discussing equipment rather than a man's life. Corvin did not argue. He did not beg. He only looked around the office and remembered the younger Seraphina sitting in a hallway decades earlier, crying because her father had missed her school recital. Corvin had been the one who found her, brought her a glass of water, and stayed beside her until she stopped crying. He remembered another winter when Seraphina's father had collapsed from exhaustion during a company crisis. Corvin had driven him home through heavy rain because no one else was available. He remembered repairing the security system the night the company nearly lost an entire year's worth of data. There were thousands of moments like that, but none were written in the official record. Seraphina handed him a termination folder and told him his final compensation would be processed. Corvin accepted it with both hands. Then he reached into his worn leather work bag. Seraphina expected paperwork. Instead, he placed a small brass key on her desk. It was old, scratched, and attached to a faded blue plastic tag. She stared at it. Corvin simply explained that the key belonged to locker 214 in the old maintenance room. He had kept it for 30 years because his supervisor had once told him that every employee should have one safe place where important things could be stored. Corvin said the locker contained something Seraphina's father had asked him to protect many years earlier. He had never opened it because he had been told not to do so unless the company was in danger of forgetting what it was built on. Seraphina looked at him for the first time with genuine curiosity, but Corvin did not explain further. He thanked her for the years he had been allowed to work there, turned, and walked out. By lunchtime, Corvin was sitting alone in his old car outside the building. The termination folder rested on the passenger seat. His mortgage payment was due in 12 days. Mireia was finishing college, and he had promised to help with her final tuition payment. His savings were modest because most of his income had gone toward raising her. For the first time in 30 years, he had no workplace to return to the next morning. He lowered his head against the steering wheel and quietly cried, not because he was ashamed of losing his job, but because he had spent half his life believing that loyalty meant something. Meanwhile, Seraphina could not stop thinking about the key. She eventually went downstairs to the old maintenance area, a section of the building scheduled for renovation. Locker 214 was still there, hidden behind shelves of outdated equipment. The key turned with a stiff metallic click. Inside was a small cardboard box, several old photographs, handwritten maintenance logs, and a sealed envelope bearing her father's handwriting. Seraphina opened the envelope. Her father's letter explained that Corvin had once discovered serious financial irregularities during a difficult period in the company's history. An executive had been secretly diverting funds, and Corvin had found the evidence while repairing a damaged server room. Instead of using the information for personal gain, he had protected the company and quietly brought it to her father. The scandal had been contained, and the executive had been removed. Her father had wanted Corvin rewarded, but Corvin had refused anything beyond keeping his job because he was afraid a public investigation would destroy the livelihoods of hundreds of ordinary employees. The letter contained one final request. Her father had written that if the company ever became so focused on profit that it forgot the people who built it, Seraphina should remember Corvin Hale. He had called him one of the company's most valuable assets, not because of his job title, but because he understood that a business was made of human lives. Seraphina sat on the cold floor for several minutes. Then she opened the photographs. There was Corvin in his 20s, standing beside her father. There was Corvin holding a young Seraphina's bicycle after repairing its chain. There was Corvin surrounded by employees during the company's first major expansion. And in nearly every picture, Corvin stood somewhere in the background, never seeking attention. That afternoon, Seraphina reviewed the outsourcing contract. The savings were significant. But then she noticed something strange. The company chosen to replace Corvin's department was owned by a private investment group connected to the same executive whose fraud Corvin had exposed decades earlier. The former executive was no longer employed by Halcyon, but his network had quietly returned through shell companies and acquisitions. Seraphina realized the restructuring plan had not simply targeted older employees. It had been designed by people inside the company who wanted to remove experienced workers, gain control over critical operations, and redirect lucrative contracts. Corvin had been fired because he knew too much without even realizing he knew it. Seraphina immediately ordered an internal investigation. Within days, several executives were suspended. Financial records revealed millions of dollars in suspicious contracts. The outsourcing deal was cancelled before it could be finalized. The board discovered that Corvin's knowledge of the company's infrastructure was far greater than anyone had documented. But Seraphina's most difficult decision was not financial. It was personal. She drove to Corvin's small home on a clear afternoon. There were no cameras, assistants, or corporate cars surrounding her. She stood at his front door carrying the brass key. Corvin answered with surprise. Seraphina did not offer excuses. She admitted that she had judged him by his salary instead of his character. She admitted that she had treated 30 years of loyalty as an expense rather than a legacy. Most importantly, she told him that she had finally understood why her father had trusted him. Corvin listened quietly. Then he told her that he did not want his old position back merely because the company had discovered his value. He wanted the company to stop treating people as disposable whenever their numbers became inconvenient. That statement stayed with Seraphina. She offered him a new role overseeing employee training, safety, and workplace standards, with the authority to report directly to the board. She also created a service recognition program for long-term employees and established an emergency assistance fund for workers facing financial hardship. Corvin accepted, but not immediately. He asked for one condition: no employee should ever again have to wonder whether 30 years of honest work could disappear with a single email. Seraphina agreed. Months later, Corvin returned to Halcyon Industries, not as the forgotten maintenance worker, but as the man employees came to whenever they needed someone who understood both the machinery and the human beings operating it. Mireya attended his first recognition ceremony, watching proudly as hundreds of employees stood and applauded her father. Corvin looked across the room and saw Seraphina standing at the back. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The brass key sat in a small frame on Seraphina's desk upstairs. She kept it there as a daily reminder that leadership was not about sitting at the biggest desk in the building. It was about remembering the people who had trusted you with their lives, their time, and their work. And Corvin kept the termination letter. Not because he wanted revenge. He kept it because it reminded him that sometimes losing everything you thought defined your worth can reveal something more important. Your worth was never determined by a job title in the first place. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes good people still matter, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad. Your support helps these stories reach someone who may need their own reminder that their efforts are not invisible. And before you go, here is a special request. Comment: a key can open a heart, below if you believe respect should never be measured by someone's position, salary, or age. Because Corvin's greatest gift was never the 30 years he gave to a company. It was the character he carried through those 30 years. And sometimes, the person sitting quietly in the corner, the person nobody thinks to thank, is the one holding the key to everything that truly matters.